Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our adventure in Tall Tales. My name is Jean Tankery. Our speaker today is a volunteer. The best way to help him would be to provide honest and useful feedback with the session questionnaire at the conclusion of our session today. Our tech master will drop that into the chat toward the end of the session. If you miss it, don't worry. You'll find it at the end of the process when you go out. If you are not speaking, please remember to keep yourself on mute to avoid background noise. We have a fun and interactive session planned today. If you want to see the speaker and make the presentation smaller, drag the speaker window to the left. Thank you. And now let me introduce our speaker. Adam Brenner brings a wealth of personal and professional experience. He has served many roles within Founders District and knows a thing or two about leading a club, area, and division. Adam's Toastmaster background started at his home club, the Backtalkers, where he has achieved the following: current Founders District Chief Judge, District F, or Division F Director, Division F Area Director, Club President, Vice President of Membership, Treasurer, Sergeant at Arms, and Founders District Spirit of Excellence Award 2019-2020. Today, he will be giving us great tips and tricks for our Tall Tales contest speeches. Please let me welcome Adam Brenner.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you everyone for joining today's session. We have a lot of material to pack in, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. But the first thing I want to do is make sure everyone can hear me, and I'm going to quickly share my screen, and you should be seeing my PowerPoint presentation. All right, I see a bunch of head nods, good. All right, so let me advance the slides here. So this is our agenda, and I want to spend the most of our time in our discussion section where we're going to talk about what makes a good Tall Tales speech, what it is, what it isn't, more importantly, and we're going to go over and listen to actually a sample speech that we have prepared for you today. And of course, when you have questions, please feel free to drop them in chat or interrupt me. I won't take any offense, I promise. Does that sound like a good plan, everybody?
Wait. Your first agenda, it should not be self-assignment. It should be self-assessment. ASSESSMENT. You got to.
Thank you, Mary, for that correction. See, I always throw in a couple of curveballs in my PowerPoints to make sure people are paying attention. So, Mary, you get a prize today. So with that, we're not going to go over all these questions in depth right now. I just want to quickly show them to you. And at the end, in our discussion section, if we have time, we'll go over each of the questions. I just want to put this on the screen here, talk about one particular question that I have in mind, and then we'll move on to the rest of our content here. And I posted a PDF of my slides in the chat. We'll do it again throughout the meeting and at the end, so you'll have a copy of what you see on the screen here. And this meeting is also being recorded, so you can always go back and rewatch as many times as you want. So the first thing I want to go over, and this is the one question I want to highlight, is, and feel free everyone to come off mute, besides the length, a Tall Tales contest speech is no different than any international speech contest. Is that a true statement or is that a false statement? Go ahead and feel free to unmute yourself. post in the chat. What does everyone think? Is this
False.
a true statement or false?
False.
All right, we got one false. All right. Anyone else want to comment?
False.
False.
False. False. All right. Well, besides Mary, who's getting a gold star today for paying attention, so does everyone else. That is correct. A tall tale's speech is different than anything else, just like every speech is different. So let's dive into and figure out what exactly is a tall tale. So before I read what's on the screen here, anyone from the audience, what do you think a tall tale is? And feel free to unmute yourself, write it in chat.
Highly exaggerated.
Highly exaggerated. Thank you, Kathy. That's exactly correct. Anything else?
Yeah,
Not
that's something
necessarily
that's.
Sorry, John.
Yeah. All right, go ahead, Andrew.
I was going to say not necessarily true.
Exactly. Yep. Not true. John, go ahead.
I was gonna just speak to an example. There's a Paul Bunyan story about straightening a river with a couple of oxen.
Exactly right. The Paul Bunyan story is a classic tall tale. So these are all correct answers, and there's more. It's a story that has unbelievable elements, right? As if it was true and factual at the same time, right? That's the hook. You need people to believe that it's true and factual, but it's also unbelievable, right? Those are two kind of polar opposites. We want to have the audience and yourself stretch the imagination, and we have a live speech demo that'll showcase this. It has to be an original story, and what I mean by that is don't take a story that's popular. For example, maybe you and your friends on May the 4th are battling a bunch of rebels, and you are countering an evil empire who rhymes with Darth Vader, right? That's an example of let's say Star Wars. That is not an original story. We all know that. So while that had humor, that had elements of I'm stretching the truth, it's not an original story. So that's the trick, right? Is making sure that it's an original story. There's some truth behind it. We're stretching it. We're having some imagination to go along with that. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Anything else anyone wants to add? Perfect. Well, I'm going to keep going, and when you have questions, I'll pause along the way. Feel free to stop and interrupt me as you do. So let me just quickly go over the contest.
The part about humorous. You want to go back to that?
Again, John, I always throw in these curveball questions in my presentation to make sure people are paying attention. So yes, as we see in the demo, you want to make sure that your tall tales has elements of humor, and that'll come out naturally as you stretch the truth. But it's not a humorous speech. We have a humorous speech contest, which we've done in the past, but it's not a humorous speech. It has elements of humor, but that's not the sole purpose. Again, you want to stretch the truth. And we'll have an open discussion later on as we discuss more of these topics. So let me quickly go over the contest format. I don't want to go over this in too much detail, but it's a 3 to 5 minute speech. That means that you see the markers at the appropriate times as shown on my screen here. But because this is an official contest, you actually have a 30-second grace period before and after. So the speech qualifies at 2 minutes 30, the minimum time, and at the most 5 minutes and 30 seconds. You got to be a member in good standing, and this is a hybrid speech contest, meaning right now the district decided it's a hybrid speech format, meaning we're planning on having contests and functionaries be either remote or in person. So you decide on your level of preference, right? And again, all the dates are on our Founders District website, and more information will be coming out from the area and division directors. So I want to go over the judges ballot, and then after the judges ballot, we'll see a live demo of a sample speech. Now, again, I've posted my slides in the chat. I'll post them again at the end of the meeting. So you have all this information. I'll have links to the actual ballot form. There's nothing secret about a judge's ballot form, right? Anyone can review it and read it. And in fact, I highly encourage you, if you're competing, to review the judge's ballot, because this is what we're judging each speaker on. So there's 3 sections. We got content, which makes up 30% of the vote. Your delivery, which is over half, right, 55%, and language being 15%. So as an engineer, right, my mind goes to, all right, let's start with the bulk of the content, right? Delivery. Let's start on delivery. 55%. Now you notice delivery doesn't matter what I say, but how I say it. That's the main takeaway for delivery. As a Toastmaster, there's many paths in the Pathways program that focus on different aspects. But the 3 that the judges are looking for are the speech techniques. Do they have vocal variety? Are they talking softly and then exaggerate, speak louder in the presentation? Do they have elements of humor, right? As we've talked about, a talk-tail speech has elements of humor, but it's not a humorous speech. Puns, exaggerations. These are things that the judges will be looking for. Physical presentation. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be physically present at the contest. Like I said, this is a hybrid speech contest, meaning contestants get to choose if they want to be in person or remote. But what they mean by physical presence is, do they have body gestures? Are they moving their hands? Do they have props? Those sorts of techniques that are both applicable both in an in-person and also online format. Voice, again, can people hear you? Do you have that vocal variety, etc.? So that's the bulk of the points. But if you nailed delivery, that doesn't mean you're going to be a winner, because you still got 30% and 15% for content and language. So you need to be a master in all of those. But again, delivery, as you pointed out, is the bulk of what we're voting on for as judges. Any questions on delivery before we move on to content and language?
What I like to say is a lot of people like to go from the end of their ballot on the right-hand side to the left side so that they don't influence themselves on what it is. And actually what it is a ranking. Who did the best? Because you're only ranking to the maximum 8 people. We got a division A, B, C, D. I'm sorry, we have A, C, D, E, F, G. So when we go to the district, we're going to hear a representative from Division A, Division C, Division D. So we've got a limited number of people that are participating. So whatever your numbers are, you're just ranking that one person that you think does best. It's not the best speech. It's not a Ball Bunyan speech. It's not anything else than what it is. It's a ranking. So if you rank somebody like 100% and they've done everything, and the next person does another 100%, you're allowed to give someone 101 points. Then if the third person does a better job, you can rank them 103. You got the ranking there. It's easy to rank the people when you figure out that you have permission to rank the presenters.
Yes, thank you, Mary. And that's a good point I want to emphasize as contestants, right? As you're speaking at Tall Tales, the judges are not there to evaluate your speech. That is done at your club. The judges here are to rank in comparison to everybody else. And the points here, right, they're for the judges to help them decide, do I go with person A or B for my first, second, third? As Mary pointed out, you could get, on paper, right, 100 points, but someone else get 101. And again, that's just really for the judge's notation. But this is what the judges are using as their criteria. So moving on to content, right? Only 30%. is what the judges are going to be voting on for your speech. So, but like any other speech, you got to have a good opening, you got to have a good closing, and because it's a tall tales, and we'll see in the next slide when we have with our demo here on what that makes up. And then, of course, language. Do you use good English grammar language? Does the English language make sense? Does it flow, etc.? So with that in mind, I want everyone to kind of memorize these three sections, because we're going to watch a demo Tall Tales, and then we're going to have an open discussion, and we're going to figure out how much points should this person be given. What were some good things? What were some takeaways? The areas for improvement.
Okay, before you go on, I have a question. This is
Of course, Norm, ask away.
Yeah, I was wondering, since this is a hybrid contest, how is delivery sort of equalized between the online contestants and the in-person contestants?
Yeah, so in person, everyone's good. So for those for the speakers in person, it's all going to be the same equipment. They don't have to worry about bringing in their own laptop and cameras and microphones. All that we provided. They just show up and deliver. And for the Zoom audience, for those contestants speaking over Zoom, we're going to, there's going to be multiple practice sessions before the contest to make sure that the lighting is fine, that the audio is clear, that they can see the timer, that they know the rules. And if there's any technical issues, we have rules in place that, if a contestant, let's say, dropped their internet, that they can resume and pick up. And as judges, we're going to do our best to avoid any sort of technical issues, right? Whether it's audio breakage or internet cuts out. We're not, again, you notice that's not part of the criteria, right? They have perfect internet and they know how to use a computer. That's not one of our judging criteria. So again, we're going to do our best to make sure that contestants know what's expected of them, and if there is issues, we're not going to count that against the contestants.
Well, I guess my point really is, on Zoom, you basically see the person's head. You might see a little bit of their upper body, and in person, you're going to see the whole thing, and they're going to be walking around on stage and that sort of thing. Is that going to make a difference?
The answer to your question, Norm, is if you came in with a costume and let's say that you're doing a Paul Bunyan story and you got the costume to fit, does the Zoom audience see your gestures and see your costume? That's what makes it in person different from Zoom. So I think that's the intent of Norm Cook's question. Does the appearance of the person in person, how does that match up with the Zoom person? And I think it's so hard to do. It's so hard to represent your tall tales or any presentation with a Zoom person looking at your head if you have a costume to support your story. So
Yeah.
the question can be answered simply by saying it's really, really hard to be on Zoom and be convincing with any of these things. That's my answer to your question. I think that's what you needed to know, is how hard is it on Zoom?
Kathy, do you want to chime in before I comment? Yeah.
I'd like to suggest that people may want to read a resource that Toastmasters provided in November last year called Best Practices for Hybrid and Online Speech Contests, because it deals with those scenarios of how the judges need to be briefed to not judge people unfairly depending on the format in which they're presenting.
Yeah. And yeah, there's plenty of techniques, right? I have some resources at the end of my deck that actually point to those resources Kathy mentioned, as well as, I think, practice, right? There's, just because I'm on a video doesn't mean my face takes up the whole screen, right? I can stand back, right? People can see more of my body. There's things that the speaker can do to help see, with their gestures, etc. But like everyone has mentioned, it is much different. Any other questions before we move on? I see Linda, you have your hand raised, and then John.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. So, is our Founders District going to offer additional training or information about how to do the presentations when you're on Zoom? Because I know it is, I live on Zoom with my business and everything. So I know it's different though. And so there's, so how is Founders District supporting people that are setting up all their equipment at home and then delivering? Is there something additional that's going on?
There is some additional contrast training coming up, but the specific of how to make your best presentation on Zoom, I'll have to just make sure that's included.
Okay.
Agree with that being an excellent idea.
Yeah, because like you said, the lighting and standing up, or whether you're sitting down, all that stuff, those would be like, it's part of the tips, but it's also how do people get to practice before they're in the speech contest. So this is great. Thank you. I'm appreciating being able to sit through this.
All right, thank you, Linda. And then, yeah, we'll have a bunch of resources at the end. And then, by the way, there's plenty of resources developed over the past few years on YouTube, Google. You can search from other clubs besides Founders District. John, you have your hand raised?
Okay. Yes. To Linda's question, I think because it's hybrid, people get to pick in person or online, whichever they're most comfortable with. And the second part was to Kathy at the last speech contest training. It was mentioned that there would be an additional update on the question of how to be fair to both the on-site and the online people. Has there been an update from Toastmasters International?
It's mentioned and pretty much elaborated on in that best practices manual. And we talked about it briefly in the first contest training, but it bears reading and rereading it, because I felt that when I reread it, I saw that it was pretty clearly defined. Things like a judge can't pay more attention to a physically present speaker for their eye contact because they're making contact with the audience. That would be considered just as good if a Zoom person is making contact with the camera. And there are specifics that are mentioned in there of judging the speech for the speech's value and not unfairly influenced by their abilities to do certain fun technical things in the Zoom environment with their frames of, peeking in from the side or doing fancy Zoom techniques that we've seen some of our world championships of public speaking performances do. Nor could they influence negatively the person that is on Zoom that cannot be very expressive with their entire body. That is, things like that are mentioned in that book. I may drop this in the chat for you.
Yeah, thank you. Sonia, do you have your hand raised? Do you have a question?
Yes. Where's the location if it's hybrid?
So all that information is on the Founders District website, but the area and division contests will all be held physically at, there's a couple of rooms we've secured at the Irvine train station.
Okay, thank you.
And again, more information will be coming out to your clubs from the area and division directors. So with that, if there's no more questions, let's go ahead and move on to our demo speech here. I invited David Moore to do a live speech, but unfortunately, he's right now teaching the Vice President of Education training. But don't worry, we have a recording of him, and We'll go ahead and share that right now. So give me a sec while I set everything up here, click some buttons, make sure the audio comes through. All right. Let me move some things over. Okay. All right. Can everyone see the screen here? I see a bunch of head nods. Let me unmute and let's see if this works.
More. A bird in the hand.
Can everyone hear that? Is it low, high?
Yeah.
Perfect.
A bird in the hand, David Moore.
So before we start, I just want to remind everyone, let's think about all those techniques we just talked about from the judges ballot, right? The content, the delivery, the physical movement, right? His vocal variety, and try and keep score at home, right? How much points would you give David? All right, so here's David's speech.
There's an old saying, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. However, after a recent incident I had, I've discovered that a bird in the hand just makes a mess. Madam Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters, welcome guests. This incident happened 2 weeks ago when I was out in the woods bird watching. I had my trusty binoculars out and I was looking for birds when I spotted an egg sitting underneath a tall tree. Now, this egg was huge. I'm not exaggerating. I knew I couldn't leave it there because it was an eagle's egg. So I put it in my backpack, I climbed up to the top of the tree, and I put it back in the nest. Then I took a minute to enjoy this fantastic view that I had. Picture this with me. Off in this direction, mountains rose majestically up into the clouds. Off in this direction, a blue-green lake shimmered in the sunlight. And off in that direction was the biggest, angriest eagle I'd ever seen in my life. Sure, Angry Birds is fun on your iPhone. The wingspan on this eagle would have stretched across this room, and she had razor-sharp talons. That eagle could be on the TV show, America's Got Talons. I wasn't worried, though. I knew birds of a feather flock together. After all, this was a bald eagle, and... Okay, I could tell she was never going to consider me an eagle, bald or otherwise, so I started scrambling down out of that tree. But just as I heard this loud whoosh, 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 I lost my balance. I reached out for something to grab onto, and whew, I was relieved when I grabbed a small but sturdy branch. However, when I looked up, I saw I was now dangling from the leg of that eagle. Well, the eagle was even more surprised than I was. She shot out of there faster than a congressman leaving Washington, D.C. on vacation. We started climbing up and up. I pulled out my binoculars and I frantically started looking for help. But all I could see were two mice sitting in a field staring up at us. That was odd. Normally, mice would scatter if they saw an eagle. Like in your Toastmasters club when you ask, who wants to volunteer to be club officer next year? But I realized these two mice were sitting in the middle of a large marijuana field. Right. They were stoned out of their little minds. All of a sudden, one mouse pointed up at me and made this rude gesture to me. Loser! I wasn't going to let some little stoner mouse call me a loser. So I reached up and I poked the eagle to get her attention. Then I pointed down at the mice. I saw a look of understanding in her eyes. The next thing I knew, that eagle folded back her wings. We went into a steep dive. The wind was racing past my cheeks. I heard this loud screaming noise in my ears, which was me screaming. because now I saw I was about to be splattered all over the ground. But just at the last instant, that eagle flared out her wings. We swooped across the ground just a few feet above it. I let go of her legs. I went tumbling head over heels. My binoculars flew that way. My backpack flew that way. As I was tumbling, I saw that eagle pounce right on those two mice. I had just killed 2 stoners with 1 bird. I didn't stick around, though. I ran back to the cabin. The next morning, when I opened my front door, there sat that eagle with my binoculars in her beak. She had this sad, pleading look in her eyes. So I said to her, "Okay, we will go mouse hunting one more time, but that's it." Madam Contest Master.
All right. So we just heard David's tall tale speech that was delivered in 2013 here at Founders District. And that was the winning speech, as I mentioned. So, you know, we just saw this, we just saw David's speech. And so let's have an open discussion, right? Everyone come off mute, put your questions in the chat. So what does everyone think? What did David did well in his speech?
Okay. So one thing that I would add is that I may have been the camera person, but we would not be panning around and zooming in and out and following him under the current rules. We have to whatever the speaking area is, set the camera for that and step back and don't touch it.
Yes, thank you, John.
Small.
Yeah, that is a minor difference between what we did years ago and we did now. But in terms of David's delivery, right? His speech, right? His content, his vocal variety, his language, right? What does everyone think he did well?
He had lots of humor, especially the part about killing the 2 stoners with 1 bird.
Exactly, right? So he used puns, right? He used a number of puns. He used exaggeration. We was talking about we got a little feedback here. When we're talking about picking up the egg, right? 2 stoners with 1 mouse. The bald, bald head, right? Flocked together, right? These are all some of the things they used.
Yeah, he had that gesture doesn't even have any vocal that goes with it.
Right. Which is why, if we look at the judge's ballot, over half of it is not on what you say, but how you say it. And sometimes not saying anything is just as important, right? Especially in a tall tale speech. All right, someone else. What else did David did well? So how's his voice, right? Did he, use vocal variety?
Yeah, he had very good vocal variety and appropriate for
And
the
appropriate, right?
exact situation.
That's exactly right, Andrew. And did everyone notice that David had props with him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that Dave does really well is that his use of pause. He knows just when to pause so that he's not rushed. He pauses long enough to let you catch up with him.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
I noticed that also, and also he doesn't continue talking over the laughter, so that he allows the audience to absorb it, enjoy it, and then move on so they don't miss what he says.
Yeah. Now in Zoom, right, it's kind of hard to gauge that audience because you don't have that feedback. But as a speaker, when you have a joke or when you have a pun, and you could laugh along with the audience as one technique, or you just take a pause, right? You make your joke, you pause, maybe you smile at the camera, and you can laugh along with the audience. In terms of David's actual speech content, right? How do you think that was formed, right? Was it believable? And Mary's shaking her head no. But within the first 30 seconds, it was believable. David's out here, he's going bird watching, right? And you can see, okay, I can see David bird watching, his binoculars, he has his backpack, right? And then eventually it started getting more stretching the truth, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, he had a really good body language, I thought. You know, he used the stage well, he used his props well, his facial expressions were excellent. So I think that really contributed a lot to it. The one thing I was going to say is his biggest laugh came when he said he killed 2 stoners with 1 bird. And I think he should have stopped right there. The next joke was anticlimactic, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely room for improvement for David. But in terms of a tall tale, right, I think the main takeaway we want is it started off with some sort of believable story, right? David going bird watching. And slowly, an emphasis on slowly along the story, right? It got more, he stretched the truth more and more. He found an egg on the floor. He climbed up a tree, right? But then he's also using imagination, right? He's describing to the audience the landscape he sees, the majestic views, and then he falls and hangs onto a bird, right? So you can see how it was a night and day change, right? He slowly built up to it. I think that's the emphasis we want to see when as a contestant, that you see this natural progression. And to the end, right, where we're just hanging on to David's next words, right? Of, you know, the eagle comes to his cabin door and says, okay, we'll go mouse hunting one more time, right? It's that hook at the end that I think really sells it. Any other comments, questions, areas that you think David did well? Any room for improvement?
One of the things that I would suggest to a person is make the story interesting enough, like David Moore did, to have the person in their mind say, and then what happened? And you just nailed it, what David did. He made it more impossible, because I know David well. He's an indoor man, and I'm surprised he has a pair of binoculars.
Yeah, you know, Mary, that might have been the most unbelievable thing, right? Is David owning a pair of binoculars. And, you know, and David's going to watch this recording. So everyone wave at him, tell him how much of a good job he did. And I'm sure we get plenty of comments afterwards. All right. So some takeaways, right? Pick an original story, right? It has to be original. If you want to borrow a quote or some sort of aspect of a story, you got to give attribution. But again, keeping it original will give you more leeway, more flexibility. And just like we saw in David's presentation, slowly build up, right? Start with some truth and then slowly build up along the way. So that, as Mary pointed out, the audience is asking, what's next? You also want to connect with your audience, right? You know, David used, you know, he did some self-deprecating humor. The bald head. He talked about the Angry Birds, you know, on everyone's phone. You want to be able to connect with the audience, even if you're on a remote call on Zoom or in person. There's things you can say, there's gestures, phrases you can use to connect with your audience. And of course, you always want to leave the audience with more. And I think like we all mentioned, practice, right? Whether it's at your home club, whether it's a guest speaker at other clubs, you want to gain that feedback. Any other takeaways anyone wants to add that they thought was good? Andrew, go ahead.
I just wanted to agree with you about making the self-deprecating humor. He is able to relate himself to the audience as one of them, because a lot of guys can attest about being bald or balding in my case, and you know, then also the other thing. So it really helps to make yourself relatable, and they feel like, yeah, I know this guy already. I know who he is. I know what he's about. That's all.
Exactly. Yep. Very good, Andrew. Anyone else? James, I see you're trying to talk, but you're on mute. So let's try and make sure I'm muted here. You're still on mute, James. I see your mouth moving. I just can't. We can't hear you. Maybe Stephen, you can kind of work with James here. Stephen, you're our tech master. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
All right, James. Well, maybe you can drop it in chat, but I'm sure whatever comments you had was going to be good. Anyone else? All right. Well, let's see. Jean, we have about 10 minutes left. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
coming up on 9.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to go over just a few more things. So resources. Let me just move things out of the way. All right. So resources. The judges' ballot is online. You can read it. I highly recommend you do if you're competing, so you know exactly what the rules are. There'll be more information, like I said, coming out from your area directors, your division directors, present to your club, so you get more information about the contest, the dates, the location, etc. I do want to thank David Moore for his speech. He did an excellent job, and he's been a huge help with this. As of course, Mary Berg. I couldn't have done this presentation without her. So thank you, Mary, for all the input. And of course, I want to thank our room monitors, tech masters, and others behind the scenes who put on LACE. So thank you, everyone. Founders District, right? Let's make sure, right? We all post on social media, right? Get the word out of Founders District, whether it's posting on your Facebook, LinkedIn, if you're a corporate club, Instagram. Make sure you're getting the newsletters, because that's another avenue of where we can all get information, especially about the contest seasons, right? And again, I'll drop the link in the chat for all our presentation material. But lastly, I started off our talk here with these 9 questions, and now here are the answers, right? So let's kind of go over them right now in the interest of time, since we have a few minutes. Whoops, sorry here. Right, so the first question, right? Is it a disadvantage to be a first speaker? The question's false, right? Doesn't matter if you're the first speaker, the last speaker, someone in between, you're all going to be judged the same way. So the speaking order is determined randomly. So it really doesn't matter if you're the first or the last, right? Is it okay for a judge to give speaker feedback after the contest? And the answer is no. Judges are anonymous, and frankly, as a judge, right, in the past, we're judging, and we're not evaluating. If you want someone to evaluate your speech, ask them before the speech contest, right? Maybe a club member to give you tips and tricks. And as a judge, since we're reviewing potentially 4 speeches, 8 speeches, more, we're not going to remember every little detail. So don't expect judges to provide you any feedback, because we're not going to. Is the audience response critical to a winning speech? No, right? Judge's ballot doesn't reference, how many times Adam Brenner in the audience laughed, or how many times Mary Berg, clapped her hands or whatever, right? Right? It's that judging criteria that we're really looking for. Likewise, if you have technical issues, right? Like we mentioned earlier, try to avoid them as much possible, but we're not going to penalize you if for any technical issues, or if one candidate has more technical issues than someone else. And we already answered number 4 earlier, so good job, everyone. And now let's go. So with those 4 questions, any comments before we move on to the next set? And then as we, as we start the speech contest season, right? You in your clubs use it as a marketing material, right? Post on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and Twitter, and flyers in the break room if you're a corporate club, internal emailing lists, right? Get people to come out, even if they're guests. It's always a good way to use as a marketing opportunity for your club. And also support your members who actually go to the area and division contests. Not everyone is able to compete in a contest, right? If you're a district leader, sorry, you can't compete, but you can certainly be a participant and watch and help out. If you have props, like we saw in David's video, right? Make sure you can quickly set them up. You get everything's done within that 1 minute. And make sure you fill out all the rules, right? And that includes notifying the contest master of the your speech title, you're eligible, you're a member in good standing, you're a club in good standing, and if you meet any sort of speech eligibility, especially for the international speech contest. And lastly, you can change your speech, right? I think this is a really important one, right? Is you can give a speech at your home club and then totally rework it for the area, and then totally rework it for the division, and totally rework it for the district. You can change it along the way. In fact, you probably should, because as you give more speeches, you'll find out what works well, what didn't work well, make tweaks, etc. So with that, I want to thank everyone for coming today, and I'll stick around for another 5 minutes. But I turn it back to you, Jean.
Thank you. We have the evaluation form for our speaker. If you will please fill that out so that he can see how he did and any tips that you might have for him. And finally, we hope that you enjoyed the speaker today. To thank him, please put in the feedback and drop into our Pathways support group at 3:20. You can access that from the Founders District website. And with that, we bid you a good day and the rest of your training or information. And who do I turn it back over to?
I think that's it, Jean. So thanks everyone.